Hello and welcome to the Humans of Forensic Science podcast. My name's Tyne and I'm a first year rep and I am in the Introduction to Forensic Science program.
Hi, my name is Hira and I am your first year rep. I'm also in the Introduction to Forensic Science program.
Hello everyone, my name is Tu. I'm in the Forensic Anthropology program and I'm a third year rep of the IVNVI Society. Today we have Murray Clayton joining us, our program officer and outreach coordinator of the Forensics program. Murray, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Murray. Like Tu said, I am the program officer and forensic science outreach coordinator. Basically, what that means is that a lot of students get a lot of emails from me, pretty much on a monthly basis, some students on a weekly basis. And if you're in the fourth year internship or capstone courses, probably on a daily basis. So, across your 4 years at UTM, you're going to hear a lot from me. Most of my admin work is making sure things, run nicely behind the scenes, right? Making sure this well-oiled machine is running and that you guys are getting the most out of your experience here at UTM. Yeah, I like long walks on the beach, et cetera, et cetera.
So as our program officer, can you describe what your daily task would be? Like, what is it like being you?
Yeah, for sure. So I do a lot of administrative work in terms of things like event planning. So recruitment events, the annual Forensic Science Day. I also do a lot of marketing and design for the program as well. So the logo that you see behind you there, that's my design. The strips we have under here, our Zoom backgrounds. Basically things to make branding consistent with the forensic science program and really elevate it to that professional level where it looks like it's part of, a comprehensive organization or institution. I take care of the website. I take care of the community hub on Quarkus that all registered forensic science students are automatically enrolled in. And I'm also a liaison with the Forensic Society. So if any students out there have issues and maybe they don't want to approach a prof or anything, and they can go through the Forensic Society, the society that can then bring those issues to me, and I'll be that intermediary between them. So really most of my work is focused on students and student success. And I personally just want to make sure that the students are getting the best time out of their education. And so I work very closely in that regard to make those kinds of things happen if they're within the realms of possibility. I'm also the manager for the CSI house as well on campus. So I do bookings for that house. I make sure that, anytime something breaks or goes wrong, we can put in a ticket to get that fixed and all that kind of stuff as well. So a lot of behind the work scenes. And then sort of the second part of that as outreach coordinator, in the before the pandemic, we would have high school tours and groups and special interest groups who would tour our CSI house, and we would run workshops, and students would often facilitate that workshop as a chance for them to practice their communication skills, their leadership skills, and in that way teach the public about what they're learning here on campus. So while that's kind of on hiatus right now, we're hoping we can get that back up in the fall again.
So I understand that before you became a part of the forensics program at UTM, you had a little bit of a different career path. You started studying classical history. Can you explain how those changes led to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. My career path is a very weird, long, windy one, and it did ultimately end up in a forensic field, and then I came to UTM. But even before classical history, I'll let you know that I actually was admitted right out of high school into the fine arts program at McMaster University. When I was in high school, I was like, I want to do art. I want to draw. I want to paint. I want to sculpt. I want to do it all. And that is what I'm going to do as a career. So I got to McMaster and then I realized, oh, wait, I don't really like people telling me what to do in terms of like art, right? I found it very hard to follow those kinds of rules, and I found it very constricting. And so I thought, well, what do I do now? So in my first year of university, and some of our viewers might be going through this right now, I switched a lot of programs. I went from fine art into English, into theater, into film studies, and then finally I settled on classical history. It was the only thing in university that really didn't make me want to cry. And so I finished the last 3 years of my degree in classical history. And I didn't actually even get an honors degree. I just finished in 3 years, and I was like, no, I'm done, that's it. And I sticking with the sort of artistic side, I actually ended up getting hired in a paint company doing graphic design for them after graduation. And I was like, well, this is great. This is graphic design. It's artistic and creative. It's exactly what I want. And then after about a year, maybe 2 years, I was like, this is boring me to tears. I'm selling people stuff that they don't want. I'm designing stuff I don't understand. I don't care about paint additives. And a friend of mine whom I graduated classical history with said to me, I'm on an excavation. Why don't you come join me? I excavate in Italy. And I said, that's crazy. Quitting my job, selling my car, leaving my home just to go and have fun in Italy. Sign me up, I'm in. And so I did that. It was the dumbest risk, but it was also the smartest risk of my life. Because if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have known that there was a whole world out there that didn't have to be corporate and office-based. And I really, really, really loved working with human remains. And this is where it gets important, because after 2 years of excavating ancient burials in Italy, I was like, I love this still, but I'm running out of money. And academia is great, but what else can I bring to society? And so that is when my site supervisor said to me, have you considered forensic anthropology? That's when it all clicked. My sort of interest in classical history, my interest in human remains, and my need to do more than just sell people stuff they don't need. All of that came together. And so I went back to school to finish an honors degree in anthropology. And I ended up taking my Master of Science here at UTM in evolutionary anthropology under Dr. Rogers, whose focus, of course, is forensic anthropology. And so all of those twists and turns painted the perfect picture for me to be where I am today. And so under her supervision, I did go on cases, I did work with human remains, and it was fantastic. But I also learned something else that I had never experienced before, and that is that I really love to teach. And I really love to be a part of public engagement. And so I started working as a volunteer for the outreach program. And that naturally evolved into being the lead facilitator for the outreach program, which eventually morphed into a full-time job at the university doing outreach, working with students and teaching. And so it's like the perfect storm of stuff I didn't know I liked until I did it. And I think there's a really important lesson there. A lot of people don't find out what they want to do in life right away, and that's okay. It's never too late to change, to grow as a person, and to really figure out what you want to do. I actually didn't go back to school until I was 24, I think, was when I started did a second undergrad. And then I didn't actually start working for the university until I was 27. So really, it took a while, but it all worked out for the best in the end, because I got to know who I was as a person, and I got to know what I could and could not do. And I think that's very important for anyone.
I think that's really good to hear, because a lot of people think like as soon as they get to high school, they have to graduate, and like when they graduate, they have to be 21 years old, and then they have to find a job. For me, I'm the same. Like all of my friends have graduated already, but I'm only in my 3rd year, and I plan on doing my master's after this. So I'll be a lot older than a lot of people. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Like everyone's going to be a different age in your program, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, everyone has a different pace. And I get emails from students or people who have graduated from university. I get those emails all the time saying like, I'm a mature student. Is that okay in your program? And I'm like, heck yeah, come on in. We love everyone in our program. I will say one of the things, having gone through many university programs, one of the things I actually do like about forensics is that it is so career oriented. It is so focused on trying to get students employed after their graduation versus like, we're going to teach you how to read a book and write a paper about it, write an essay about it. And then once you graduate, it's like, okay, well, here's your diploma or degree. Whereas I do actually sincerely find that students in forensics do get a very strong sense of what they want to do by the time they've graduated. And we try and guide them as best in that path. But, everyone's different. It still might work out that you really love the degree, but maybe that's not what you want to do after you graduate, or you recognize that in your field, you will need grad school, right? Or you will need advanced education after the undergraduate degree. And that's okay. It might cost a little bit more, but that's okay.
So you're now teaching the 271 course, which is like the forensic ethics course. and you were an ethics bowl judge, which sounds really cool. And I would love to know more about that if we have the time. So you recently came into the 239 class to talk about the trolley problem and how it specifically relates to forensic science. But you never really talked about what you would do in the trolley problem. And I'm genuinely curious because, you like a lot of different ethics and you brought up a lot of really good points on both sides. So I'm curious, where do you sit on like the trolley problem?
So, we were discussing before you pressed that record button about how much I love ethics because there is no right answer, right? And one of the reasons I love teaching it is because I don't have to have the answer for the students. It's all on them. Very rarely does someone ever ask me what I would do. And I think in my personal opinion, I've been through so many trolley problems with so many variables that it's very easy to sort of explain away. But if we're just going to boil it right down to that, pull the lever or let that train do its thing, big spoiler, I think I'm going to let the train do its thing. I don't think that I have it in me to be the active agent in someone else's death. And, for a variety of reasons, people would agree or disagree with me, but I think that, it's not as bad being a bystander as it is to be actively involved in someone's death. And yep, maybe an unpopular opinion for some, but that's where I stand on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's much better to be a bystander than a killer.
Not that it's okay either way, right? I feel like you got a level of culpability either way, but maybe I'm just like running in slow motion trying to get to that lever and I'm just too late, sorry. But yeah. But it's great that we don't have to actually deal with these kinds of things in real life.
Yeah, it's great that it's all hypothetical.
Yeah, exactly. I'm only a hypothetical callous monster.
Yeah, well, that is really interesting.
Okay, so I have a question more related to the forensics program now.
Sure.
I'd like to know what advice would you give to students going into the forensics program?
Well, I think one of the most important parts of advice that I will constantly be saying, and anyone who reads my monthly newsletters will always see me have this at the bottom, but when in doubt, book that academic appointment, right? There's no shame in having to talk to one of us about troubles that you're going through, or, feeling either confused or frustrated or, not knowing what you want to do. You need to talk to someone about it. You need to definitely realize that there are support systems in the admin and across the university to help you, right? And even not just necessarily academic advice, if you need counseling or health and wellness assistance, if you need academic skills, all these things are at the university just waiting for you to contact them. And it's always better to go sooner than later, right? If you're struggling through something and you're just like, well, maybe I can make it through, maybe I can make it through, it's probably already too late when you get to the other side. So my biggest piece of advice is please just use all of the resources out there. You're paying school fees for them. You don't want those fees to go to waste. So if you want to be utilitarian about it, make sure that the money you're paying into your school fees is actually being put to good use. And then that goes with other things too. So when we reopen up, like, the gym is covered under your school fees. Use the facilities, and it doesn't just have to be running on a treadmill. It can be going to any of the dance classes or any of the other activities that are provided by those fees. I think that's really, really important as a part of advice. My second piece of advice is that don't be afraid to adapt. I think, too, as you had mentioned earlier, we come out of high school, we're supposed to know what we want to do. We're supposed to have this plan. And not a lot of people appreciate how much plans change and how much plans need to change to sort of just get by. And as COVID taught all of us, we got to be adaptable. And humans are very, very adaptable. We're way more adaptable than we give ourselves credit for. So if things don't happen the first time, try again, right? Talk to the right people, try and find out ways to make it work. Caveat to that, also, third piece of advice is you should also know your limitations, right? If you are dead set on something, that's great, but you need to be realistic in some standards too. You need to also understand that sometimes it's not in the cards. You can try as hard as you can. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. And I think knowing the difference between your limits versus trying harder and just, giving it the good old college try, knowing the difference between those two is very, very important, because you don't want to set up yourself for further failure down the line if you can be adaptable ahead of time. And then that's very sort of just life success oriented, but I think it's applicable to a lot of students in our program as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like for me personally, I'm a person who like is very resistant against change. So like I really could use those advice, and I learned like even the past few years during COVID that sometimes I just have to let life take me wherever. Yeah, and
Yeah.
just adapt and change. Like don't be afraid of change, and maybe something good will come up.
Yeah. I think that whole sort of go with the flow idea, if something is changing, you change with it. We want to be resistant to change, but eventually we have to accept that, sometimes it's better just to go with it.
So like, do you have any sort of like words of encouragement for first years or like incoming students?
Yeah, definitely. Post applications are probably going to be one of the most stressful things you'll go through in university. Maybe secondary to like the 4th year capstone courses, maybe, or going through one of the mock trials. But post certainly is going to be one of the most stressful things you can do. So if you make it out that other side, you can breathe a sigh of relief. Also, I think that, you have to accept that a lot of people don't get in. There's limited placements, but it doesn't mean your journey is over, right? A lot of people will try again the next year, or they'll alternate or be given an alternate. Sometimes if you don't get into your specialist post, Teresa may suggest, well, maybe you'll actually be really good in the major, double major instead. And all of those avenues, or even the minor, if you take a double major in different disciplines and then do the forensics minor, all of those avenues can still lead you into where you want to be, right? It's not closing doors fully. Do you not get the same opportunities in different avenues? Yeah, that's true, but it's flexible because there are other avenues to get experiential opportunities, and certainly to connect with our professors and faculty, which, as you may already know, are all professionals to some degree in the field. So just because you don't get into post at the end of your first year, don't panic. You can try again, or you can use it as an opportunity to evaluate where your strengths lie, and maybe step sideways and think about it. I would say, in regards to the actual physical form, don't stress out so much about it, because it's really not that tough. Your statements should be nice and good, yeah, but at the end of the day, it's not worth added anxiety and stress. It's just a form application. Another piece of advice is don't forget to do the post application on Acorn and our website. That's a big one that a lot of people forget. Yeah, honestly, no, really don't stress about it, because, regardless of what happens, it's not always the end of the line. That's the reality.
I guess we're going to call it like the professional stuff out of the way. I want to ask you, what was your favorite case that you've ever worked on? If you can like disclose, or however much you can.
I can, yeah, actually. This is my go-to case because it's so wacky and weird. This was actually the first official case I had ever been on. And it also took place across Halloween weekend. So it was extra creepy. Me and one of my colleagues in the master's program, we were called out to a little town around Lake Erie for a house fire, and it ended up being a murder-suicide. So two victims, and we were pulling those bodies out of the wreckage. So obviously very, very serious. But as part of that, one of the things that I found just the craziest and coolest about it, just, excuse the fact that it's the first case I've ever been on, but the resiliency of the human body to actually preserve what's inside you, despite how badly damaged it's getting on the outside, was just fascinating. Because when we went to the autopsy room the next day, or the autopsy lab the next day, and we did the autopsy, like the organs we were weighing were in perfect condition, so much so that we could actually track the bullet trajectory of the person who had been murdered, and we could find out, it was done from behind, and we could see it go through the lungs, so we could track all of that stuff and confirm the cause of death, as not being the house fire itself, but rather the ballistics. There were a few other weird things with that case. And one is that we couldn't find this layer of tissue under the skull cap, this sort of subderma that acts as a buffer between the brain and the skull. And, that's not really possible because you'd be getting concussions every time you turn your head. What we had found was that the fire was so hot, the brain had actually started bubbling up over that tissue layer like popcorn. And so, we were like prying away pieces of brain. And we're like, oh, there it is. So that's something that was really cool. And so, all of this culminating in the same case. One other thing we had found was that when identifying the sex of the individual, there's a very easy way to tell male from female, right? For males, that usually burns off in a very high intense fire. You don't find a lot of traces of male genitalia. For females, you open up the torso and it's in there preserved, like how I had mentioned. But in this one individual who we had suspected as being female, it wasn't there. We did a little bit more digging sort of through the torso, and we discovered that there were 4 ligaments inside the torso that had been severed. And this was actually the result of a hysterectomy, which is a medical procedure to have those internal reproductive organs removed for health purposes. And so, this sort of mystery about like, where are her organs, a little bit solved. And we backed that up with medical records to confirm that, yes, this is the individual we suspected it was. So yeah, a lot of really cool and interesting things all in that one case. My first case ever, my Halloween case. I love telling those stories because, you don't really get much better than that. Subsequent cases I've been on, haven't been that exciting. It really set the tone for the rest of my career. But yeah, that's probably one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, that seems like a massive debut case. Like,
yeah, exactly. And I don't want to say that all the rest were slightly disappointing from there, but certainly didn't have the glamour of that one.
Mm-hmm.
Were you like nervous for your first case, or like was it more like a exciting feeling?
I was super excited. I think I was excited to an unprofessional level, but because we do very good at because we do very well at our professionalism training, I had sort of the self-awareness to know that, like, okay, this is stop smiling, right? I haven't gotten to this crime scene yet. At this point, I'm just getting out of the car. And I'm like, okay, stop smiling, wipe that grin off your face. You got a job to do. You can't be seen as being like this goofy greenhorn in front of, all the professionals. So yeah, definitely there was a moment where I had to step back and, compose myself. Because even though I'm super, super excited on the inside, I don't want to seem that way when I'm doing my job. And I think, you guys can probably relate. Forensics is probably the one discipline where it's okay to be super excited to be digging up bodies. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, I will also add, you'll never exactly know how you'll react for the first time when you come across real human remains to that capacity. I was very surprised that I was so okay with it, but I think a lot of that was due to my training, right? I had been trained so well and so thoroughly in all of this that it wasn't shocking, it wasn't gross, it wasn't scary. It smelled like chicken, house fire, but other than that, I remember I couldn't eat chicken for at least 2 weeks after that because I was just like, nope. But yeah,
I think that's another good part of the forensics program. We have so many like ethics and professionalism courses that teach us how to like properly like act at a crime scene, and I think it's really needed in our program.
I agree. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I agree. I think that, it's super useful just to have training in those scenarios where you don't know what you're going to be like until you get there, but you can at least try and anticipate it.
Yeah, I think that like just even having professionalism training in like any program is something that really is needed, especially
I agree. Yeah.
So much is like reliant on like job interviews and stuff like that.
I say it all the time in some of my other presentations, but like, I think every discipline, every university program should have at least one professionalism training course, at least to get you familiar with the codes of ethics that your discipline is dealing with, right? And knowing the do's and don'ts of what you're dealing with there. It's so important. And a lot of people graduate university and they don't even know that there's a code of ethics for their, organization or society or whatever the case may be. Yeah. I definitely think I'm always in favor of everyone having at least a little bit of that training.
We did a little bit of research into you before doing this, and you actually worked on a project that sounds really interesting. It's reuniting families, which I would love to know a lot more about. Like, it sounds incredibly interesting.
Yeah, so this was actually a very, very heavy, but I would say rewarding in the sense that it really opened my eyes to a lot of what was happening with this project. So I spent 2 weeks in Texas, and I actually went down with a bunch of other grad students. We spent 2 weeks in Texas, essentially identifying bodies of migrants who had died crossing the southern border from Middle America into Texas. And what often happens is, we know that there's a migrant crisis down there, right? This was made public all over the news in the last couple of years. But what a lot of people don't know is that they don't just travel in caravans through those major routes. They also cross at all points of the border where it's very remote. There's not a lot of food or shelter. A lot of them don't end up making it to their destination. And of course, the justice of the peace or whoever comes along and collects the bodies, and those bodies get dumped in mass burials, unmarked graves, and their next of kin never hear from them again. So this Reuniting Families project, which is a project for the Consortium of Identification down in Texas, they aim to work with governments to identify these people. If they can, they'll take DNA samples and they'll run them against missing persons databases from the home countries, and they try and reunite those remains back to the families that they left behind, or if possible, families that have already made it into the US. So, DNA, obviously, you would always think like, we'll just get DNA, get familial DNA, but a lot of the times DNA is very expensive, it's very time consuming, and you actually have to have a sample to compare it to, and we don't always have that from the home countries. A lot of the things we use are cultural markers or cues. I remember one of the bodies that were recovered, they were found with a shirt tied around their waist, and we didn't really think anything of it. It's a hot day, you might tie a shirt or a sweater or something around your waist. But it was found out that the rest of the sort of troop that they were traveling with had done that when they died as a marker, so that they could come back and collect them when they had made their life, or that at the very least they could be identified. And so those sort of cultural cues or habitual cues are some of the ways that we can try and figure out who those people are. As anthropologists, we do a full biological profile that is age, sex, ancestry, stature or height, and any other cultural modifications that we can find on those remains. Yeah, it was very heavy. It was very solemn, because when we think of this migrant crisis, we think of people coming from Mexico, people coming from maybe Colombia or South America, but the truth is that they're coming from all over the world. In fact, they pay tens of thousands of dollars to get smuggled into the US from places like Croatia, Italy, China, anywhere. And then the real tragedy is they paid all this money to a human trafficker, and they don't even make it through alive, right? And then their family doesn't know what happened to them. So a large purpose of this project is to try and bring closure to the families, try and give these people the dignity that they deserve in death, and trying to mitigate the amount of illegal dumping or burials of these bodies. Sometimes funeral homes or cemeteries will just dump them in a grave as opposed to like giving them any sort of respect. So yeah, very, very, very multifaceted in that regard, where there's a lot going on there that needs to be resolved. And yeah, it's an ongoing problem, right? It's not something that you can just solve in a 2-week trip. Unfortunately, I did have to come back and do my studies, but yeah, we do the best we can with what we have.
Yeah,
I should also mention that it's run through Baylor University in Waco, and so their forensic students, they're the ones who continually sort of keep that program moving.
That seems like it would be a really eye-opening experience.
Mm-hmm.
Since you talked a little bit about like identification, I'm curious like which like aspect is most challenging, like determining age, height, or ancestry. Yeah, which one would give you the most problems? Or
I think my easy answer would say it depends on what you've specialized in, because even if you specialize in anthro, you can specialize further in one of those facets, right? So for me, I did my master's degree looking at age since death, and I actually did find it very, very difficult. I personally would think that is one of the hardest things, because you only are ever given a spectrum or a range of age, whereas, biologically male or female is pretty binary, questionable. There are other factors there. Ancestry is also kind of difficult, but for the most part, we can fit it into some kind of watered down category. But age, after a certain age, like they all kind of look the same, right? And before a certain age, it's very, very easy because we have dental patterns, we have growth plates. But after you're a full-blown adult, narrowing it down is very, very, very tricky. So that's personally my one that I think is the most challenging.
I also feel like it's even harder to determine all those criteria because in the field or on an actual case, you're not going to get a full skull or a full pelvis, like
Yep.
you get fragments, which makes it even harder. And that's why like the forensic anthropology program with Dr. Rogers, like she's a really great teacher in that. And we learn how to identify these fragments and still make a identification.
Yep, exactly. And, and if you can't do it macroscopically, you go deeper under the microscope and try and figure it out from there. But yeah, there's a lot of research into currently in our program into microscopic analysis, because sometimes, like you said, we only have fragments. So if we can try and figure out as much as we can from just those tiny fragments, then it all contributes to the larger body of knowledge.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it's a life's work sort of deal.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you go into, right? Because you could spend your whole life as an academic researching these methods and validating these methods. You could spend your time in a lab. You could go into sort of the pathology route and be a forensic pathologist and apply some of those methods in the autopsy room. Or you could do what I did and say grad school is too hard, I quit, right? It's not for everyone, right? So depending on where your strengths lie, you're gonna fall, and hopefully you're gonna play to that.
Well, you touch a lot, and I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Clayton. Do you have any final remarks?
Yes, if any students have any questions for me, please feel free to email me. My email is always open, even if I'm not fast to reply. My doors are usually open when I am around campus. I'm in MN 5204. So, if you have questions, you feel free to stop by and say hi. Other than that, I look forward to everyone's journey through the program. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I have one more thing. I have to clarify, I co-teach 271 with Dr. Woodall, so I can't take full credit for that course. Yeah.
All right, so that's all we have today for the Humans of Forensics podcast. Feel free to check out any of our other episodes as well as our website. Follow us on our socials on Instagram, Facebook, etc. We also have an IVNVI Discord that you can join. So thank you so much for listening.
Smash that like button, subscribe.